pastor. Okay? I always have to do that. Bad pastor. Anyhow, we're going to spend some time swimming in the deep end. It's a location we don't often visit. And the reason for that, I think, is that there's so much victory in the Christian life. There's a lot of joy and celebration. There's, walking through life guilt-free, forgiven, redeemed, empowered by the Holy Spirit. Nothing like it. In fact, I'm always amazed, honestly, when I encounter people who somehow manage to journey through life without having a relationship with God. I'm not sure how they do it. In fact, I'm not sure how they can even get their heads in that place. We live at Clucas Lake. I sit out on the deck in the evening. I contemplate the incredible complexity of the world that lies before me. The plants, the animals, the cells, the DNA that shape them, the intricacy of the physical world, from the mysteries of the universe to the equally unfathomable puzzle of life itself, of consciousness and creativity, our capacity for art and music, and the incredible inquisitiveness that leads us to create everything from machines to computers. And I consider that there are people on this earth who are okay with the idea that if you take a bunch of atoms and throw them out into the universe, that they will eventually and randomly arrange themselves into something that looks like this. And I think, how can they say that what I believe in is illogical? In his letter to the church in Rome, the Apostle Paul wrote, "Since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse." Back in the days when I was writing mountain climbing guides, I'd often stand on a peak 3.5 kilometers in the sky with the words of it was a thing I used to do with words of Louis Armstrong's famous song, "What a Wonderful World," going through my head. Creation and all that has been crafted by God's creation is nothing short of a masterpiece. But unless you're living in a fairy tale, we're all painfully aware that life on this planet is not all rainbows and unicorns. Along with all the wonder and beauty, there's a dark side to human existence. There's war and death and disease and misfortune. There's tragic accidents, the actions of people who live only for themselves and care nothing for others. There's greed and addiction and all manner of adversity. In the oldest book in the Bible, Job chapter 5, verse 7, we read the words, "Yet man is born to trouble as surely as sparks fly upward." We're born to trouble because we live in a fallen world. Our hope is that the fallen world doesn't fall on us, but we know that isn't always the case. We've all taken a journey down that road. We're skipping along through life, enjoying the sunshine and fresh air, and wham, we're blindsided by misfortune. And sometimes it can be our own fault. Sometimes it can be the natural outcome of our own bad decisions. My older brother, I think of him, he smoked 2 packs of cigarettes a day from the time he was 13 years old. And when he was diagnosed with COPD, he called me to say he felt that life was being somehow unfair to him. Okay. But at other times, we have absolutely no culpability whatsoever when it comes to trouble in our lives. It has nothing to do with our actions. There's no way we could have seen it coming. And there's absolutely nothing we could have done to prevent it. I just turned 71 10 days ago. Let me tell you something I've learned in 7 decades of life. The longer you spend on this earth, the more opportunity you'll have for times of great joy as well as times of tragedy. The man who authored the Bible had a process for dealing with tragedy. They called it lament. and we're no longer any good at it. That's why we're going to take the tough journey, walk through a 3-part series entitled The Lost Art of Lament. I want to encourage you to write down some notes during this series. There won't be lots of them, not in case you're ever going to need this material, but when you're going to need it. No one likes to hear the prediction that sooner or later you're going to walk through a dark night of the soul. But unless you're destined to lead some kind of charmed life, you are. You may have never noticed it before, but the Bible is thick with lament. Over a third of the Psalms are laments. Job is a book comprised almost entirely of lament. Prophets like Jeremiah and Habakkuk, however you want to pronounce it, used lament to express their suffering as they cried out to God. The entire nation of Israel voiced their lament after they were taken captive by the Babylonians. In a way, lament is God's complaint box. You know, I'm old enough, I can remember when businesses used to have those back in the 1960s. They used to have a little black box stuck in the wall with a slot on top, and on the side was written the word complaints. If the person serving you at the counter was rude or unhelpful, you could write out a complaint, you could drop it in the box. When the 70s came along, they changed those to suggestion boxes. Now, granted, I'm pretty sure there was a trash can on the other side of the wall behind those things. But in theory, at least, those boxes were supposed to bring problems to the attention of management in the hopes that something would be done about the issue. Lament is triggered when we experience a circumstance or event that does not appear to be in keeping with what we know about God. And the ultimate end game of lament is to get us back to that place where we once again trust God. But I want you to listen to this next statement very carefully. If you attempt to arrive at a place of authentic trust without first making the journey of lament, you'll find yourself living in denial. You may experience a measure of trust, but that trust will be too shallow to be of any use to you in the storms of life that are yet to come, and believe me, they will come. To be human is to endure misfortune. If you ever find yourself needing to lament, you'll soon discover that the journey is in itself the destination. Now, that's a lot of really deep stuff, so let me bring it down to earth a bit. It's significant that I'm sharing this message with you on Father's Day because I was once the father of 2 sons. I now only have one, at least on this side of heaven. His name is Joshua. He lives with his wife in Calgary. But let me tell you the story of how I lost my oldest son. It was Boxing Day in 2021, Sunday morning. We were at the tail end of the COVID lockdown here at Lakewood. So we were still doing online services. There was no people. We were preaching to chairs. It was my turn in the preaching rotation. I had just finished delivering a sermon entitled The Day After Christmas. And I was looking forward to the rest of the day because my oldest son, Jesse, and his family were going to come out to our place at Clucas Lake. We were going to exchange Christmas gifts and have dinner together. I was excited because I had a special gift to give to my son. Jesse owned a successful construction company in town, and he was a bit hard to buy for. But he liked to come home from work, put his feet up, and enjoy a glass of scotch before dinner. And he liked good scotch. He wasn't a drinker. I never saw him overdo it. Just a glass before dinner, and that was it. So I went looking for a good bottle of scotch for him. And thanks to the wonder of the internet, I found the perfect one. It was bottled in Islay, Scotland at the Ugadal Distillery. It had just won the Best Scotch of the Year award in Edinburgh, Scotland. Only 2,000 bottles were produced, and they were being grabbed up all over the world. But I discovered that the BC liquor store in Whistler had 2 bottles on the shelf. They were the only 2 bottles in all of BC. But because I was headed to the district staff retreat in Whistler in November, I phoned the guy up and bought one over the phone. Now, I know some of you are shocked that a pastor would go to a district retreat and come home with a bottle of scotch in his bag. Don't worry, I'll pray that God will deliver you from the spirit of legalism. But the point is, I was really looking forward to giving Jesse this special gift. On Boxing Day, I stepped off the pulpit here, finished my sermon, stepped off the pulpit here, walked through that door, went upstairs to my office. It's right behind the cross up there, and the phone rang. And Dave answered it, and he said, "Ian, it's Glenda." And I picked it up, and she said, I don't even want to tell you. I don't even know how to tell you. And I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "Jesse is dead." Now, some of you know that when I was younger, I used to box. Boxing is not fighting, it's a sport. I always have to remind people of that. But I was a heavyweight. Every once in a while, there'd be a card with a scheduled boxer would cancel. They'd call in a replacement, and you really didn't know much about the guy. But sometimes he would turn out to be a walking gorilla with hands the size of a 10-pin bowling ball. Now, boxers are trained to keep their abdominal muscles tight during a bout, but if you lay off for just a second and you take a body shot with some of those big guys, it's like getting hit with a pickup truck. That's the only way I can describe hearing those words from Glenda. I literally couldn't breathe. It was all I could do to ask Glenda what had happened. Apparently my son had just poured a concrete foundation on a house the day before Christmas. Because it was 30 below that night, he'd put a generator and an electric heater in the basement to help the concrete cure. He'd stop by early in the morning before heading out to our place to refill the gas tank, and he was overcome by carbon monoxide fumes. When he failed to return, his wife Sienna called his best friend Jamie, who went to the house and discovered him lying dead in the basement. While I was trying to wrap my head around this news, Dave stuck his head in my office and said, "Ian, Sienna and Jamie are here." And I walked downstairs in a daze, and I was met with a shattered daughter-in-law and equally devastated friend. I drove to my son's house, where I was asked to break the news to his teenage sons, and his youngest son and his little girl, who was not yet 3 years old. They're actually here today. Now, part of my job when I was chaplain at the prison was to break the news about family deaths to inmates. And I did that on a weekly basis. I don't think there was a week went by that I didn't do that. And for some reason, on Christmas Day, it was always. And sometimes more than once on Christmas. That's how I used to spend my Christmases. But this was different. This was a lot different. It knocked the wind out of Christmas, that's for sure. In fact, it was a couple of years before Christmas felt like a celebration again. But Glenda and I learned a lot about grieving in those days. You know, we cried a lot. We sat in silence a lot. We learned that the most valuable counselors in that time were other people who had walked that same dark road. You know, I think of our friends Ken and Mary Wood. They're sitting right here, you know, part of our Lakewood family. I'd been at their side when they lost their son. Now it was their turn to sit at ours. Ken and Maureen Shamoon, some of you may know them, used to be a professor at the Bible College. It's not so much anything they said, it's just that they were there. They were willing to be there, you know, and we could look at them and say, they got through this, they survived this. If they can, so can we. You know, after a time, grief begins to fade. It has its season and it passes, but mourning lasts forever. I'll mourn my son until the day I die. It's been an interesting journey. You know, at the beginning, I was pretty numb. You know, I actually preached here at Lakewood the Sunday after my son's death. Somehow that was therapy for me. I got to talk about how his friends honored him, how his climbing buddies who ran a pyrotechnics company in Australia dedicated the Bondi Beach New Year's fireworks display to him. But for weeks, Glenda and I just grieved. We cried a lot. We hugged a lot. All I could do in those days was pray, which I've since discovered is really the first step in the process of lament. Prayer, turning to God. If you ever find yourself on the path of lament, you really only have two choices. You can turn to prayer or you can turn to despair. I chose prayer because it was the only logical path forward. Now, there were two events that drove me into God's arm in those days. Back in November of 2021, just after I purchased that bottle of scotch in Whistler, I was walking back to the hotel, and when I came to the plaza in front of the building, I experienced something of a mental image. Others would call it a vision. I'm not sure visions are all that straightforward. But I saw in my mind's eye an image of a group of about 25 people. We were standing around a table in a room sharing a toast to Jesse from that same bottle of scotch I was holding in my hand. Now, I honestly didn't think much of it at the time, but it's curious that at Jesse's memorial service, we gathered a group of 25 of the most important people in Jesse's life, and that's exactly what we did with that bottle. We lifted a glass to honor his life. I'm from an Irish family. That's an Irish thing. You got to do that. I can remember phoning Dave Horton and saying, Dave, I'm going to ask your permission to drink a bottle of scotch at Ness Lake Bible Camp, and when I tell you why, you're going to say yes. And his answer was, I would expect nothing less from you, Ian. He said, you've got my attention, now talk. Now, the second event took the form of two short conversations. One was with one of my old climbing partners, who was also my spiritual mentor when I was young, when I was a young Christian. He and his wife live on the side of a mountain in the Southern Rockies. And I used to use his place, Jesse and I, together, used to use his place as a base camp when we were leading climbing expeditions. But he phoned me after Jesse passed away, and he said, Ian, he said, Jesse came to me in a dream last night. He said he thanked me for being part of his life, told me not to be sad, told me he was in a wonderful place and was happy. Now, that in itself would not have been that strange, but a month later, I ran into one of Jesse's former employees at a restaurant in Prince George, and he came up to me in tears, and he said, I've been meaning to call you, I just keep putting it off. After Jesse passed away, he came to me in a dream. He said he thanked me for being part of his life. He told me not to be sad, that he was in a wonderful place and was happy. Now, I don't know if Jesse visited the dreams of anyone else on that night, and they never told me about it, but those events pretty much sealed two things for me. First, God knew this was going to happen. It doesn't mean that he willed it. Lots of things happen in this world that are outside of God's will. It's not God's will that we sin, but because we live in a fallen world, it still happens. But the other is that God has Jesse in the palm of his hand. You know, I know exactly where my son is. Now, here's the thing in this. When we pray, God responds. He communicates. He talks. And he's got a million ways of doing that, some of which are quite unlike what we might expect. He uses people, circumstances, visions, dreams, inner stirrings. His methods are endless. But it's a two-way street. If we're not talking, God isn't interested in a one-way conversation. Christianity is a relationship, not a religion. When trouble comes into our lives, that shouldn't be when we start to pray. We should already be there. Now, I'm going to wrap this up, but I want to leave you with three things I've learned from the many journeys I've taken down the road of lament in my life. These are three things that you will sooner or later have need of before this life is over. The first, there are two great movements in life. At any given time, we're either moving toward God or away from God. But whatever direction you're facing when crisis comes into your life, that's the direction that trouble will push you. Crisis drives people of faith into the arms of God, but it drives people who are spiritually weak away from God. You ever known someone who's endured a tragedy and they never set foot in church again? They're mad at God. Their faith lacked the strength to get them through the fire. Don't wait until the night falls to build a strong faith. Build it when the sun is shining. Put in the work. Dig in. Go deeper now. Someday you're going to need those reserves. The second idea, many of the crises we're called to endure in life, they're like losing a part of our soul. You know, when my son died, part of me died with him. But here's the deal. When you lose a piece of your heart, you need to have enough left to keep pressing on. Have a purpose in life. Know why God put you on this earth. Know what your mission is. Know what your ministry is. Pour your time, pour your energy into doing it. You know, I got a friend who possesses an enormous talent, but his wife died a few years ago and he's lost. If you asked him what his purpose is, he wouldn't be able to name it. Like Cain in the book of Genesis, he's a restless wanderer on this earth. If your job is taken from you, if your health is taken from you, if a loved one is taken from you, make sure you don't lose your purpose with them. And the third and final idea I want to leave with you as we set out on this journey of discovering the lost art of lament, know this. Wisdom is gained in the valleys of life, not on the mountaintops. The hard places in life are where growth happens. You know, when I lost my son, I could never have predicted that my relationship with God would be so deepened. But I was granted the terrible privilege of participating in the deepest emotions of God, because he too lost a son. You know, those of you who are fathers and mothers, you know, you can barely imagine the heartache of losing the child you held in your arms as a baby, taught to speak his first word, taught to take his first step, sent off to his first day of school, watched in pride as he made his way in life. But I now know more than ever what our sin cost our Heavenly Father. Wisdom walks the path of pain. Over the next 2 weeks, Dave first and Jonathan afterwards, we're going to guide you through unpacking the lost art of lament. It's not a happy topic, but it's such a critical part of being an authentic disciple of Christ that I would urge you not to miss it. Well, we're going to transition into our response time now. This is where you can respond to God and kind of process some of the things I've talked about this morning. Best way to do that is probably just affirm to God in your heart any adjustments you need to make in your life. You know, anything you need to press in deeper on. Our worship team's going to come up, lead us in song. As they do, our communion servers will be standing at the front here, distributing the cup that represents the shed blood of our Lord, the bread that represents his body broken for us. Receive God's forgiveness. Take the elements back to your seat with you and partake whenever you feel ready. We're not going to give you a cue to do that. If you would like someone to pray for you this morning after you receive communion, you can make your way over to our prayer room there at that door. The door may be closed. Don't worry about it. Just open it, head right in, take a seat. Once everyone has received the communion elements, our hospitality ministries team will come around to receive the morning offering, and you can also give at the kiosk at the back of the church. But let's worship God together.